Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of the Rose Tinted Ceilings podcast. Happy Earth Day.
I think Earth Day has passed a little bit at this point, but I think we should celebrate the Earth every day because we live on it and we should appreciate that. Same thing with International Women's Month. I was thinking about this earlier. International Women's Month is over and we should still be talking about it. Earth Day is over and we still should be talking about that. And I feel like if something has a day or a month where we aim to recognize it, then we should pay attention to it because there's probably a reason we need to recognize it, which is why we're talking about both today. Two birds, one stone.
Yeah, today we're going to be talking about the topic of ecofeminism. What is it? What does it mean? What are kind of the things that affect both the earth, the climate, and feminism?
These are really good questions. Isabella just said, what is it and what does it mean? Because I also had these questions. We have brought up ecofeminism on this podcast before. If you're a loyal listener, you've known this. But when we talked about different types of feminism, we brought it up briefly. We talked about how it kind of like meant the connection between women and nature and how it kind of talks about how the patriarchy will affect both. That's kind of where we left it. We didn't go into it too much in depth on the episode. We didn't learn about it too much in depth ourselves. But because it was Earth Day recently, and because we also want to learn new things all the time and help you guys learn it too, we decided to take the time to actually answer those questions, which was actually a lot more insightful than I thought. But it's going to be good. It's going to be a fun episode today.
Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about how environmental changes are affecting women around the world and bring some awareness to environmental issues and how oppression affects both the nature and marginalized genders. So,
Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I think we can just start off with talking about how it was founded, right?
I think that's great. Because if you ever try to Google ecofeminism, you've probably gotten a lot of just words thrown at you. It's a little hard to digest, but I think it's a little easier if we do talk about the history of it a little bit. At least it made it a bit simpler for me. So that is a pretty good place to start. Ecofeminism was actually started by the French. I think.
Yeah, her name was Françoise Debon. She's a French author, a labor rights activist, and a feminist. And she's considered the founder of the social movement of ecofeminism. She was a member of the French Communist Party. I didn't really look into that too much. But she also co-founded the Front Homosexual d'Action Révolutionnaire. That was pretty good. I hope my French teacher watches this. So she founded a lot of things.
She did. I don't take French, but I'm guessing the translation is somewhat the Revolutionary Homosexual Front, which is pretty impressive. I think that
Pretty
she founded that. I'm reading here that she also signed the Manifesto of 343, which legalized abortion, in which she declared that she had an abortion. Which is pretty sick. I know France has always been pretty pro-abortion and pro-women's reproductive rights. So I think it kind of makes sense that she was so active in it, and I'm glad that she had the chance to do that.
Yeah.
She had a pretty extensive history, not only in feminism, like you can see here, but also in politics, like the Communist Party.
Right.
And I know a lot of people examine ecofeminism as the intersectionality between politics and feminism. So it's kind of nice to see where that came from.
It's pretty awesome because abortion was illegal at the time in France. So they did have the reason is called the Manifesto of the 343 because they got 343 women to sign it and say, yes, I had an abortion illegally. So they really were risking getting arrested. But she wasn't the one that started it, but she was definitely very involved in activism.
You know what? That history is really neat, and I'm glad I found out about that because I didn't know that before. Well, when she coined the term ecofeminism, she did it so in her book, Le Féminisme ou la Mort, which translates roughly to feminism or death, which is a very strong title. But honestly, she said what she said. I was telling Isabella we should have considered using this for our podcast title. Because I think it gets the point across. Because it really is. Like, if you're a woman in those times where abortion was illegal, it is feminism or death. She's right. But that's when 1774, that's when the term ecofeminism was coined. So it's still, like, I'd say relatively new compared to, like, other branches of feminism that have been around for much longer. That's why there is a little less information about it around, and a little less research, but it's still developing. I know it is growing exponentially, and we'll get into that a bit later. But yeah, so it's pretty new. It's still it's in its little infant stages, I'd say.
Yeah, compared to like other types of feminism that were coined, the late 1900s was definitely like a very late time. So it's kind of interesting, especially how it changed a lot from then to now, even though it's been, what, 50 years? So when she first coined the term, it was kind of talking about how nature is connected to how the patriarchy oppresses both women and nature. So it kind of encourages women's being part of environmental activism and kind of having that type of solidarity. And she also cited that toxic masculinity, was the cause of like population growth and pollution and a lot of destructive things for the environment.
So I think, like, that kind of relates to kind of like the Google definition that comes up if you try to search this, like the fact that the feminism and climate change and like climate activism are connected because both are inherently connected, because both are rooted in the patriarchy. But at the same time, those are just a lot of words, and if you don't it's kind of hard to draw out that connection when you're just seeing that. Like, I get that. I could barely understand it at first, how, like, where this connection kind of comes from. But that's kind of like what she delved into in her book, I think. But if once we start getting into like real life examples coming up in this episode, I feel like it'll be a little simpler. So if you're not following now, we'll get there. But I know that a lot of the criticism that was originally directed at ecofeminism was that it kind of participated in this idea of white feminism that has been around since like almost the beginning of feminism and has been brought to more attention recently. And I think we just did an episode on this, like the last one, on intersectionality and how important it is. But a lot of people criticized how there was a lack of colored voices in this kind of debate, in this topic, despite the fact that marginalized groups like women of color are a lot more and directly affected by climate change as well.
Definitely. I definitely agree with that. And she also mentioned that women have an inherent connection to nature, which we were also talking about earlier. How we feel like kind of the viewpoint on what is moral to say about that is different now. Because although there's that whole idea of Mother Nature and Mother Earth, it is also important to recognize that it's not like it's not an umbrella thing, Not all women might have that connection.
I also read that this connection isn't like inherent as some texts might suggest. It's more of like where women have been historically at like a place where they need to pick up this role of being like the protectors of nature because no one else was doing it, and how women have just been seeing their moms and their grandmas and their great grandmas doing like these like protecting nature roles. So that's how it kind of became associated with feminism. Well, it isn't like inherent as some things might say.
Okay, so do we want to get into some of the current examples then?
I would love to. So as I mentioned before, this connection between feminism and climate change and just like this like discrimination between both is kind of hard to grasp, but the example that made a lot of sense to me was examining Africa's Sahel region. I'm sorry if I'm butchering that. In this region, 80% of the farmland is degraded. And in this region, there are also more than 20 million child brides. The mechanism that kind of goes in there is because people who are in deep poverty because of this lack of farmland, this ruined farmland, are forced to give up their daughters or pull them out of school and sell them off and throw them into child marriages just so they can survive the financial impacts of climate change. That's where the connection comes in. Because of this lack of land, because of these lack of resources due to climate change, women are going to be discriminated more because of that. Like, that's where the patriarchy and the connection comes in. So being able to fix climate change here would help feminism. Being able to fix both of them because they're interconnected here. Like in this example, it's pretty obvious how interconnected they are. Being able to give the resources and energy to try to fix both problems at once would be more efficient.
I definitely never thought about that. How the climate crisis, it really does impact all of us, but how does it impact women specifically? How does it impact children specifically? That's a very interesting take, for sure.
And I think the UN also, the United Nations released a paper on this too. I don't know if it's a paper, like a PDF, where they talked about how after environmental disasters, 80% of people displaced by that climate change and by these disasters are women. Women are inherently at more risk after something like a tornado or like a tsunami, just because they have like things like less savings or less access to resources or like less like of a support system around them, and because of that they're less likely to be able to take on that primary like caregiver role. Because of that they're less likely to take care of their families, and this throws a lot of women into poverty or in a lot of danger, especially when there isn't resources to help women directly after these disasters, which is why the United Nations in that paper were trying to promote gender sensitive like tackling of climate disasters, which I think is really important that like these big global organizations are recognizing ecofeminism and its roots and what happens. And it's like a real thing. It's not just a concept, although most of the things that come up when you Google is kind of like just this concept of this connection. It's pretty real, and you can see it in a lot of examples.
Definitely there's that thing with emergency response too. You're going to be dealing with all different kinds of people from all around the world. And there's definitely a different approach that's needed for women in different places too, because women are treated differently in different places. So how are they going to respond to you? How do you have a trauma-informed approach? That's definitely
Yeah, I think one of the things they suggested was involving women more in this emergency response, so giving women leadership roles, letting them use their skills to help the community and help other women and do what they know best in their own community. That was one of the main things they pushed, and I can see how that could work. I can follow there. Like, that makes a lot of sense. So I'm glad that they're moving more towards that approach.
For sure, for sure. So there was one example called the Green Belt Movement, and this was established in 1977 in Kenya. And the organization plants trees to fight against deforestation with a view to also support women around the world. So they kind of meshed these two things, just like what ecofeminism seems to be.
So a lot of the examples of ecofeminism we're also seeing is another interpretation of it, I think, that I came across, was that it's giving women a chance to participate and be leaders in the climate change movement, which allows them to be more than sometimes what the patriarchy tells them to do, especially in some of these countries where the patriarchy is still really strong, and women aren't like specifically seen as they're supposed to be leading something, they're supposed to be taking charge. They're more seen as like caregivers. So that's another aspect of like ecofeminism, where they're giving women these chances to like elevate themselves while also fighting off climate change, and that's another thing. They're just always connected in these examples. I also saw there was a movement called Women's Voices for Earth, which is an organization in North America, which is led by women to control toxic exposure in their local environment. So that's kind of what I was saying, like they're taking charge in their local environment, all while helping climate change.
I like that there's a local scale of organizations and a global scale as well, and they're run by women, and they're doing good things for the environment to fight against climate change. I love that. It's awesome.
And I know we touched a little bit on how white feminism was kind of centric in ecofeminism at the beginning, but that's changing. Like, thank God it is changing, but it is, because people are realizing, like all the other branches of feminism, how important women of color voices are in these discussions, in these topics, because women of color are going to be, like, again, in anything else, disproportionately affected by climate change. So I think I read that this specific example in 2016, a London study showed that Black, African, and Caribbean communities were disproportionately exposed to toxic air conditions, and represent 15.4% of those in the city exposed to illegal and severely high levels of nitrogen oxide, but only represent 13.3% of the city's population. So again, intersectionality here, it's always going to be relevant. Again, we just did an episode on this. It's pretty good if you want to check it out. But seeing stats like that just show how important it is to always keep this in mind, no matter what we're talking about. And that's why ecocentrism has had a lot of activists who are really vocal speak out against how some marginalized communities are going to be more affected by climate change.
Yeah, definitely. It's the intersectionality thing. Again, recognizing that people from different places are going to react to things differently and they're going to experience things differently, just like climate change. So we definitely need more movements like the Greenbelt movement, like Women's Voices for the Earth, so we can fight these things.
And I think after learning about ecofeminism like more in depth and seeing like the practical applications of it, I can understand it a lot more. Because before, when my basis of it was just like the patriarchy affects both, I'm like, okay, yeah, what does that mean though? But now seeing like again, the patriarchy affects both, but but like in depth and like seeing how that actually affects women already all over the globe, it makes a lot more sense to me. It's definitely more like digestible, being able to see like the real life consequences of it, and I can definitely see their point more, and I'm really glad because I didn't know or care too much about ecofeminism in the past. Now I'm pretty passionate about it. I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm glad we were able to learn a bit today and kind of break our stereotype of what we thought it meant. That's
I hope
awesome.
you guys did too, because ecofeminism, not very talked about, but you guys can talk about it now. Thank you guys for watching.